The Pasha of Marrakesh had been insisting for a long time that I pay him a personal visit. So on the afternoon of February 1st, I, General Wilbur, Colonel Gay, Colonel Williams, Colonel Davidson, and Captain Jensen flew to Marrakesh. We were met at the airfield by a battalion of infantry, a French general, and the Pasha. We first called on General Martin, the French district commander, and then went to the palace. The palace of the Pasha occupies about 2 city blocks and is completely walled in. To approach it, you walk through a street where 2 vehicles can just pass, and in through a very narrow gate. From this, you enter a beautiful garden with a marble fountain and 2 very beautiful white marble lions. The Pasha has 3 guest houses, each one of which, in my opinion, cost probably $1 million. The one assigned to General Wilbur and myself has on the first floor a museum and the Pasha's private office. This museum contains everything from Roman coins to the latest type of firearms. The collection of swords is remarkable, and I am sure that one of the weapons I saw is a crusader's sword. It was impossible to admire any of these, because had I done so, they would have immediately been presented to me. However, they were very interesting. I saw a suit of chain mail in the most perfect condition of any suit I'd ever seen, probably due to the dry climate, which had prevented it from rusting. There were also a backplate and a breastplate of around 1400, which was remarkably good and very heavy, completely chased in gold. Among other things in the museum was a set of china presented to the Pasha by the President of France. On the second floor of this house was a large room about 30 feet square, with a lot of booths around the sides, such as we see in soda fountains, except that the partitions were made of carved and painted wood. As you entered the room, there was a movable bar with every kind of liquor, but which nobody seemed to drink. My room was on the next floor and consisted of a bedchamber, a dressing room, and a very complete modern bathroom. The walls were white up to about 10 feet, and above that were stucco. I had a sitting room 40 feet square with a sofa completely around it, with the most beautiful ceiling and walls I've ever beheld. The entire wall, above 6 feet, was made of Arabian stucco work as fine as lace. The Pasha told me it took a year to make, and I believe he was not exaggerating. The lower part of the wall was a mosaic of white, red, and yellow tiles. At the end of the hall, leading to the apartment and bedroom, was an Arab whom the Pasha referred to as a slave. He was very amiable and armed with a dagger, and spent his time trying to find out how he could do something for me. The house occupied by the other officers was similar to mine, but had more bedrooms, 4, I believe. The beds were covered with velvet, over which were laid real lace counterpanes. Each bedroom had a modern bathroom. After we had washed for half an hour, which apparently was the rule, we went into the third house, built on similar lines, where we drank tea. When this was finished, the Qadi, who is the Pasha's son, took us on a tour of the city and surrounding country, all of which belongs to the Pasha. They have several very large concrete tanks, I should think about 200 yards on a side and about 10 feet deep. At one of these tanks, the guide informed me a sultan had been drowned, although he personally thought he'd been murdered, and he showed me the boat in which the accident had occurred. It was a large steam launch with a steam engine, dated about 1880. The boat was about 30 feet long, in a fairly dilapidated state, but once had been painted yellow and green with a gold design laid on. The daifa, at which only about 12 people were present, was along the usual lines, except that everything was more elegant. In fact, General Martin, who has served in Morocco for 40 years, said he had never seen such a banquet. After dinner, we went to a room and had 2 sets of dancers entertain us for about an hour. These women would seem to be about 30, and are, I understand, very highly trained. Each one wears a pastel-colored dress, and over it a sort of surplice of lace. There are 6 women in each group, with one male fiddler playing the single-stringed instrument which always accompanies these dances. 4 of the women beat time and squeal, while 2 go out and do a sort of duet. They waltz around for a little while, then kick the front of their dresses about 3 times, stamping their feet in time to the music, and then do 1 minute of a violent hula. They then return to their place in the line, and 2 other girls do the same thing. This continues without alteration until the end of the show. We were called at 6 on the morning of the 3rd for a light breakfast. The light breakfast, which Wilbur and I ate, took 5 men to serve, and consisted of coffee, toast, 3 kinds of preserves, tea, 4 kinds of candy, and some cakes that looked like scones, only not so well cooked. Afterward I found the 5 men eating what was left, which was ample for about 15. We left the palace in the pitch dark about 7 o'clock. I rode with the Pasha and his personal bodyguard in a Rolls-Royce. The others followed in 2 other cars accompanied by the son of the Pasha. We drove for about 200 miles through desert, gradually changing into the foothills of the Atlas Mountains. This was the country in which, as a young man, the Pasha had fought, and it was very interesting to hear him describe the fights which had taken place. He is a Berber, and for 300 years his family has ruled this part of the country as absolute chiefs. I have never met a man in whom the hereditary qualities of leadership are so apparent. The idea of his superiority is so inbred that he does not have to show it. Wherever he passes, the Arabs bow and give a modified Hitler salute. So far as he is concerned, they do not exist. And yet at the table he will help clear off a course and pick up the crumbs. In profile, he looks very much like an Egyptian mummy, with a café au lait complexion on the dark side. His hands are beautiful. He said that Arabs would never fight against Berbers except in buildings, and in his early days they had very few weapons except muskets, so the only way he could kill Arabs, of whom he had destroyed many hundreds, was by sneaking up to a defended house at night and putting a bomb under it. In this operation they would make a fuse out of hairs from their whiskers and threads from their coats, impregnating them with powder, and when the sun came up they would tell the Arabs they would blow up the house if they did not come out. If they came out, they shot them, which the Pasha described with appropriate gestures. If they refused to come out, they blew a hole in the wall and stormed it and killed them with swords. He described one fight in which he had attacked with 2 platoons for about 12 hours against 1,000 Arabs. The road we drove along was the one where he had had this fight. Apparently this time the Arabs were not in the houses. He had 1 platoon attack by fire, and he led the other one in a mounted charge from the flank. He said it was very gay, and that nearly all his men were killed as well as the Arabs. He also showed me an olive grove where he said there were so many dead Arabs that the jackals got sick eating them. The country is full of almond trees, which are really beautiful. Viewed from the air, they look like ghost bouquets or like bits of cobweb covered with dew. When you get close, they look very much like cherry trees, only more beautiful and more numerous than any cherry trees I've ever seen. There is an Arab custom that when a man is married or has a birthday, all his friends come and each brings 5 almond seeds which they plant. This accounts for the large number of trees. After driving 120 miles, we came to a tent where a second breakfast of cake, wine, and coffee was served, and where we were met by 6 French officers. There were a number of Gooms present, armed with carbines, and riding 1 horse and leading another. I drew a very nice Arab stallion. He was about 15'2" and probably weighed 1,000 pounds. The saddle was an exact copy of the military saddle I bought of Janine at Saumur in 1912. The Pasha rode a mule, large and black, with a red saddle shaped something like a bathtub. When we were all mounted, we proceeded up the mountains for about an hour. In addition to the mounted grooms, there were an equal number of footmen, who carried shotguns for the mounted men or simply went along for the fun. We were moving at a good hound trot, and these men kept up with perfect ease, barefooted, over sharp rocks and a few cactus. When we reached the place for the drive, the Pasha personally placed the important guests. I was on the left, in unquestionably the best place. Wilbur was next beyond me, and on the Pasha's right were Colonels Gay and Williams. Each post was in a blind made of cut brush about 3 feet high. I could see to the front about 40 feet. When everyone was in position, the beaters, of whom there were about 1,000, started to work. First, jackals and foxes came running very fast through the trees, and I missed 3 shots, but so did everyone else. Then a very large boar charged immediately in front of the Pasha, who missed him, and then turned with his Mannlicher rifle and opened fire at the boar and the retainers, who were all getting out of his way. Fortunately, no one, including the boar, was hit. About this time, the largest and blackest boar I've ever seen came straight at me over rocks and downhill. I hit him in the left eye with a slug at about 15 feet, and his momentum carried him so that he fell close enough to splash blood on me. It was really quite exciting because, had I failed to stop him, he would probably have hit me, and he had very fine teeth. Another boar came, whom the Pasha shot through the body, but failed to stop until he'd pursued a number of Arabs. Everybody except me turned and shot at this one, and again no one was hit except the boar. At the completion of this beat, we moved downhill, about 500 yards, and had what they called a contrebattu, which means that they drive the game back over the ground they've just passed. This time I shot a jackal, but did not have a shot at a boar. The Pasha killed 2 more boars, still with his rifle. In all, we killed 14 boars, 5 jackals, 3 foxes, and 2 rabbits. We drove back to the tent where the cars were waiting, had some more food, and were informed that the local chief was holding a daifa for us. We got to his place, which was a 1-building village like Ouarzazate, only smaller, with about 300 inhabitants, all of whom lined the courtyard, dancing and singing during the entire meal. Owing to the fact that I had to get a plane back before 5 o'clock, this was a short affair lasting only an hour and a half. But not during one moment of this time did the inhabitants stop singing and dancing. Flying back in the evening, I was struck by the fact that the whole country is pockmarked with old Arab tent emplacements. They give one the impression of leech bites on horses. The number of these indicates that this country has been tremendously inhabited for a very long time. It has always been my ambition to meet a robber chief in his own country, and also to have an exciting hunt with little danger. The Pasha and my wild boar, which was the largest killed, satisfied my 2 ambitions. Victory Parade held at Tunis, May 20th, 1943. Headquarters, 1st Armored Corps, May 20th, 1943. On the night of the 18th, General Eisenhower phoned and asked General Bradley and myself to be present at the parade, probably feeling that we had something to do with its existence. We secured a B-25 from General Cannon, and flying at better than 240 miles an hour with a tailwind, reached Tunis at 9:45 a.m. The flight up was particularly interesting to us as we passed over most of Bradley's battlefields. We also passed over the ruins of Carthage, which are only visible on the map. On the ground there is nothing to see. However, the mountains back of it, of which I read a description in some old book, were perfectly familiar. Our bombing of Tunis had been extremely accurate, because, while the waterfront was largely obliterated, the other portions of the city were hardly hit at all. All the airfields were covered with destroyed German planes, probably several hundred. When we reached the field, General Eisenhower had just arrived, driven by K. Summerby. We both shook hands with him and congratulated him, but he was so busy meeting high-ranking officers of the French and British armies that we had no time to talk to him. Shortly after we arrived, General Giraud came and was warmly greeted by everyone. After a while, the sacred families got into automobiles, escorted by British armored cars, and we followed behind the escort with General Gatrou as our companion. He speaks the clearest and most beautiful French I've ever heard, and we had quite a nice conversation. Bradley and I were put on the right of the reviewing stand, which was largely occupied by French civilians and minor military officers. Immediately in front of us was the line of French colonial infantry, of a very dark color, although I do not believe they were Senegalese. Just across from us was a battalion from one of the British Guard regiments who put up an exceedingly fine appearance. On my immediate left was a very large French ecclesiastic with a purple sash around his middle, which acted as a background for a tremendous cross with an amethyst in it. I do not know who this man was, but he was apparently much beloved, as many French officers and enlisted men came up and shook hands with him and called him General. I think he spoke English, as he apparently understood what I said to Bradley. Presently there was a great fanfare of trumpets and much saluting, followed by what the French call a fire of joy. It was very amusing to notice the change in people's expressions, practically all of whom had been bombed, when they found out that it wasn't an air attack. All this noise heralded the arrival of General Giraud and General Eisenhower, accompanied by Admiral Sir Andrew Cunningham, General Sir Harold Alexander, General Anderson, Chief Air Marshal Tedder, Air Marshal Cunningham, Mr. Macmillan, the British political officer, and Mr. Murphy, the American. Mr. Murphy and General Eisenhower were the only two Americans on the stand. The next event was a march past by a band of Highland pipers, I think from the 42nd Regiment. They came by in the traditional half-step, countermarched, and repassed. It was a very splendid sight. When they'd cleared the front, the band of the Foreign Legion, with the traditional white caps and red epaulettes, numbering at least 100 instruments, marched by, leading the French contingent. Then, for nearly an hour, the French troops, who had participated in the battle, marched by. As usual, they marched magnificently. They have an innate capacity for ceremonial marching, and as far as that goes, for any other kind of marching. They consisted of French white troops, French Senegalese, Gooms, and the Foreign Legion. The Foreign Legion was very resplendent, with enormous whiskers, many of which were red or blonde. In fact, it seems to me that the French Foreign Legion is largely composed of Germans and Swedes. They are very fine-looking troops. One impressive thing was that these troops, who had participated in a victorious campaign, were armed with Model 1914 equipment, in spite of which fact they had done well. Of course, now they will be immediately re-equipped with American Lend-Lease materiel. However, during the fighting, the only American equipment they had were some Thompson submachine guns and some bazookas. Each French regiment and separate battalion carried the tricolore, with the battalion honors written on it. This caused almost continual saluting on the part of the spectators. After the French had passed, a battalion of the 34th Infantry Division came by. Our men were magnificent physical specimens, very well turned out, but there were no flags, not even company guidons. And regimental commanders marched on the right of the file closers of the leading company. In spite of their magnificent appearance, our men do not put up a good show in reviews. I think that we still lack pride in being soldiers, and must develop it. Following the Americans came the British contingents, with a representation from every division in the First Army, each led by its division or corps commander. The guard units were big men, the others were very small. All of them were dressed in shorts, except the Gurkhas, who are very small, and, in addition to their bayonets, carry a huge knife, something like the Philippine bolo. The British also understand the art of ceremonial marching and really put on a splendid show. There was one sergeant major who should be immortalized in a painting. He typified all that is great in the British non-commissioned officer, and he certainly knew it. I have never seen a man strut more. Following the British infantry came the American tanks manned by British, and the British Churchill tanks, also a number of field guns. The whole march past lasted about 2.5 hours. When it was over, about 30 of us were asked to a lunch at the French Residency given by General Giraud. It was a very formal affair, but there were no toasts. Afterward, most of us had to leave at once in order to get back to our stations before dark. I hope that this is only the first of many such triumphal processions in which I shall participate. The flight back was very fast because the wind had changed, and again we had about a 30-mile tailwind, with the result that we got in half an hour before we were expected and had to wait. At the lunch I met my friend General Briggs, who commands the British 1st Armored Division, and had a chance to introduce him to General Harmon, who is commanding our 1st Armored Division. They are very much alike and both very successful. General Giraud remembered me at once and was extremely complimentary in his remarks. He is a very impressive man and looks exactly like a modernized Vercingetorix. Notes on the Arab. Casablanca, June 9th, 1943. It took me a long time to realize how much a student of medieval history can gain from observing the Arabs. All members of our oil-daubed civilization think of roads as long slabs of concrete or blacktop, or at least as dragged and graded thoroughfares full of wheel ruts. As a matter of fact, roads, or perhaps it is better to call them trails, existed thousands of years before the earth-shaking invention of the wheel was even dreamed of, and it was along such roads that our sandaled or barefoot progenitors moved from place to place, just as the Arabs do today. Viewed from the air, the Arab road is a gently meandering tracery of individual footpaths. Where the going is good, this collection of paths may spread to a width of 20 to 40 yards, while where rocky outcroppings must be circumvented or defiles pass through the wandering tendrils, they come into focus and form a single path, only again to spread out when the going improves. Nowhere is a wheel track or a heel mark, because the Arabs wear heelless slippers or go barefooted. Their animals are unshod. There are no vehicles. In the waterless districts, the roads are generally straight, but not in the brutal mathematical meaning of the term. They are straight only as a man would walk from one point to another, or as the dried slime path where a snail has crossed the sidewalk. In the coastal lands where there is rain, we have alternative roads. The principal track follows the ridges for the same reason that, in our West, the Indian trails and buffalo paths and even the highways made by the pioneers stick to the high ground. In the dry season, the meanderings of the crest-lined road are short-circuited at times by trails leading across low ground which would be useless in the rainy season. In the forest, the roads are even more sinuous. The men who made them could not see very far, so the trail wanders largely and keeps only a general direction. It takes little imagination to translate the Arab on his white stallion and the men and women on donkeys into the Canterbury pilgrims, while the footman, equipped with a large staff and poniard, can easily be mistaken for Friar Tuck, Little John, or Robin Hood. This similarity not only applies to their dress, save the turban, but also to their whiskers, filth, and probably to their morals, and they are all talking, always talking. They have no other recourse. Few can read, there are no books, no newspapers, no radios to distract them, only the spoken word, and truly they are winged words, with a daily rate of from 40 to 60 miles, as we learned during the battles in Tunisia by checking the known origin of a rumor against the time we heard it. Of course, rumors were not factual, but were in general little less garbled in transmission than some of those received by radio. In the rumors, tanks often were reported as trucks, and trucks as tanks, and always the number attained astronomical proportions, but that is natural. Once I asked a farmer in Virginia how many soldiers had passed him, and he replied, "I don't know for sure, but I reckon about 1,000,000, and he could read and write and had a radio. For a long time I was greatly intrigued by constantly seeing groups of Arabs squatting in the dust or mud. How they avoid piles is a mystery, gossiping. Then I got the answer from a chance remark by a soldier who referred to such a group as the morning edition of the Daily News. The agricultural habits of the Arab are a strange mixture of old and new. Mowing machines and combines work side by side with Ruth and Naomi, many Ruths and Naomis, cutting wheat with a sickle and carefully tying each bundle with a wisp of straw. But even when using modern machinery, the influence of the trail road is apparent because the Arab has never learned to hitch animals abreast. Therefore, we see a mowing machine or a header being pulled not by a span or two of horses, but by 4 horses in tandem, each horse personally conducted by an Arab, while 1 or more often 2 handle the machine. They actually also have gleaners, as in biblical times. The threshing is done on a dirt floor by horses walking or trotting in a circle and spreading manure as they go. Sometimes the animals simply move at liberty. At other times they pull a small roller. After some days of this operation, men armed with three-pronged wooden forks throw the chaff into the air and the wind blows it away. Finally, women, using large tray-like baskets, throw the remaining grain and manure into the air in the final stage of winnowing and get rid of at least half of the droppings and some of the dirt. The burial customs, too, are strange. In many places, usually on hilltops, there are small, square, white buildings with a dome-shaped roof which contains the remains of a holy man. These graves of marabouts are not churches nor even shrines, simply tombs, but it is the custom to plant the dead near them without any markers or even mounds. In fact, our men have unwittingly walked on these graves with resulting unpleasantness. From the air, the graves can easily be seen clustered around the marabout tomb, or simply grouped on some low hill. Apparently, the Arabs are as much afraid of water in death as they are in life. One day I saw a funeral which, for its rugged simplicity, was outstanding. In the leading cart were several elderly men sitting on the floor, while between their feet was the body, wrapped in white cloth, with half of its length sticking out the tail of the cart and dangling in the wind. Behind this came other carts and one four-wheeled wagon, some bicyclists, and then men and women on foot, perhaps 30 in all. The Arab influence on Spain and Latin America is again emphasized as summer weather approaches. There is a regular epidemic of sombreros made of parti-colored straw, exactly like those we know at home, except that, since they are worn superimposed on the turbans, they are much larger. I've never had a satisfactory explanation for the turban. The one usually given, that it is a tropical headdress, does not hold, in view of the fact that many Arabs, particularly in the army, wear turbans which consist simply of a rag wrapped around the head, leaving the whole shaven crown bare. Another similarity between the Arab and the Mexican is the utter callousness with which both treat animals. Neither an Arab nor a Mexican would think of unpacking an animal during a prolonged halt. If the beast is chafed raw, the Arab does not even bother to treat the wound with lard, which is the invariable panacea with the Mexican. He just lets it bleed and trusts to Allah. Because a horse is dead lame is no reason for not working him. All the animals are head-shy and many are blind as a result of the cheerful custom of beating them on the head with a stick. The method of castrating sheep and cattle is unspeakably cruel. I think that the reason that the horse and donkey are not altered is due to their architecture, which forbids the employment of the Arab method. One cannot but ponder the question, what if the Arabs had been Christians? To me it seems certain that the fatalistic teachings of Mohammed and the utter degradation of women is the outstanding cause for the arrested development of the Arab. He is exactly as he was around the year 700, while we have kept on developing. Here, I think, is a text for some eloquent sermon on the virtues of Christianity. Ceremony held at Headquarters, 1st Armored Corps, June 19, 1943. Colonel Chauvin informed me that he would like to confer upon me and 2 other officers designated by me, who had served with me in the Tunisian campaign, an honorary membership in the 12e Régiment de Marche des Tirailleurs Algériens, together with the regiments Fourragère of the Legion of Honor. I named General Bradley and General Gaffey, and then asked if it would be possible to confer the same honor posthumously upon Major R.N. Jensen, my aide-de-camp who was killed in action in Tunisia. This request was granted. The ceremony was as follows. The 1st Company of the 1st Battalion of the 12e Régiment de Marche des Tirailleurs Algériens, preceded by the French colors and the French band, arrived at the courtyard of our headquarters at 4:35 in the afternoon. Inside the court was one of our platoons and the band of the 36th Engineers. When the French were in position, our platoon came to present arms, and the band played to the colors, in honor of the French flag. Colonel Chauvin then accompanied General Bradley, General Gaffey, and myself to inspect the French company. When we arrived in front of the colors, which were posted on the left, the French band played the Marseillaise. At the termination of this, Colonel Chauvin, accompanied by his Chief of Staff, Commandant Guerrier, took a position in front of us and in a loud voice said, "Lieutenant General G.S. Patton, Jr. is hereby made an honorary member of the 12e Régiment de Marche des Tirailleurs Algériens and is presented with the fourragère of the Legion of Honor." He repeated this announcement in front of Bradley and Gaffey. He then stated, "Major R.N. Jensen, dead on the field of honor, April 1st, 1943, is hereby made an honorary member of the 12e Régiment de Marche des Tirailleurs Algériens and is presented with the fourragère of the Legion of Honor." Colonel Chauvin then took a position on my right, and the regular American retreat was played. The flag lowered, and then our band played first the Marseillaise and then the Star-Spangled Banner. This terminated the ceremony. The French color guard consisted of Lieutenant Billard, who carried the flag, and 4 tirailleurs. Each of these 4 men was decorated with the Military Medal, which is the highest award a French soldier can receive, it being restricted to enlisted men and army commanders. The lieutenant had the Grand Cross of the Legion of Honor and the Croix de Guerre with a number of palms. The officers in the French company were all Frenchmen. The men were all Berbers and were extremely fine-looking. It is always amazing to note the difference between a Berber dressed in his normal costume of a bathrobe and a Berber dressed in uniform. Their appearance changes for the better.
Chapter 2. Operation Hudson.